Three people, one street, one question. Behind the first door, a widow. Her husband left her $200,000, and that envelope now has to do everything he used to do. Feed the children, heat the house, hold for good. Behind the second door, a doctor in the middle of a strong career, 100,000 saved, 10,000 more each year, and the earned confidence of a man who solves hard problems for a living. Behind the third door, a young man making $200 a week, saving 1,000 a year in a coffee tin. Different lives, different fears, different money. Graham drew all three of them, just this way, and gave them his answer. It is the same answer for all three. The scandal is that he meant it. Start with the rule everyone already believes, because it sounds like arithmetic. The return you can expect is proportional to the risk you are willing to run. Timid money earns little. Brave money earns more. Half the brochures on Wall Street were built on that slope. Graham looks at it and writes 4 words. Our view is different. The return investors should seek, he says, depends not on appetite for risk, but on the amount of intelligent effort the investor is willing and able to bring to bear on his task. The smallest return goes to the person who wants safety and from concern. The largest goes to the one who makes investing a full profession. Between them, there is no comfortable slope, no point where a little extra boldness, without the work, buys a little extra return. Now watch that rule reach the first door. It is evening. The children are asleep, and the widow's arithmetic will not quite close. The envelope is large, but it is all there will ever be. Wall Street has always known what to sell a frightened person, and it is on her table now, promising extra income. Graham's counsel is blunt. The one thing she must not do is take speculative chances to make that extra income. Trying for a return she has no equipment to earn. And then he writes the most humane counsel in the book. If both ends will not meet, it is far better for her to draw $2,000 a year out of the principal itself than to risk half of it reaching. Spend a little of the money, openly and on purpose, rather than gamble the children's floor beneath them. Counsel no brochure has ever printed. The doctor should be safer. He has none of the widow's pressure and twice her confidence. But Graham files a dry clinical note of his own. Medical men, he writes, have been notoriously unsuccessful with their investments. They bring ample confidence in their own intelligence and a strong desire for a good return, without the realization that doing it well takes sustained attention and something like professional training. The skill that reads an X-ray does not transfer to a stock certificate. Only the confidence transfers, and the doctor gives this hard case 10 minutes at the end of the day. Behind the third door, the light burns latest, because the young man is the dangerous one. He loves this. Finance, Graham writes, holds a fascination for bright young people with limited means. They want to be intelligent and enterprising with their savings. And Graham, who was this young man once, punch cards and all, refuses to scold him for it. That attitude, he says, is all to the good. Youth can stand the disappointments and profit by them. So his counsel is a sandbox, not a sermon. Study security values and test that judgment against the market with the smallest possible sums. The little bright jar, never the big plain one, and not $1 more until the judgment has earned it. The 1,000 a year, meanwhile, goes through the defensive door with everyone else's, because a stake that small cannot pay for the long apprenticeship the aggressive game demands. A widow afraid of the future, a doctor sure of himself, a young man in love with the game. 3 different failures waiting to happen, and the same defensive door for all 3. Behind the defensive door is a machine, small, dull, and deliberately so. Half the money in high-grade bonds, half in the shares of big sound companies. 50-50. When a rising market swells the stock half past its line, the defensive investor skims the excess back into bonds. When a falling market shrinks it, the same hand feeds it back up to level. Never more than 75% in stocks, never less than 25, whatever the weather. That is the whole machine. The point is not the arithmetic, and Graham is almost embarrassingly honest about it. The chief advantage of such a formula, he writes, is that it will give him something to do. The energy that would otherwise chase whatever is rising gets a chore instead, and every move the machine permits runs exactly opposite to the crowd, selling into euphoria, buying into gloom, a teaspoon at a time. It is not a formula for beating the market. It is a cage for the animal that would try. And if a cage sounds beneath anyone's dignity, watch who could not manage without one. Yale University ran a version of this discipline for years. Stocks held near a fixed line, trimmed back whenever they grew past it. Then came the greatest bull market in history, and holding the line began to feel like leaving money on the table, year after year, before a committee. In the early 1950s, Yale quietly gave its famous formula up. By 1969, the endowment stood 61% in stocks. Graham's autopsy is one phrase. The great advance had an almost lethal effect on formulas. And the cause of death is worth saying plainly. The better stocks perform, the more unbearable discipline feels, and even an institution with centuries behind it could not bear it. There is one more part to the machine, and it settles an old score. Remember the tycoon who promised that $15 a month would make everybody rich, and the arithmetic, run 20 years later, that turned his $80,000 into $8.5. Graham, having demolished the promise, adds a quiet aside. That plotting saver bought every single month. Through the crash, through the depression, through the war, with the market itself ending those 20 years lower than it began. And the plan still earned better than 8% a year. Compounded. The promise was a lie. The discipline underneath it was sound. Buying by the calendar instead of by the mood has a dull name, dollar cost averaging, and it is the same cage in another shape. It asks the saver to be neither brave nor brilliant, only regular. The stock pan has its own rules, and Graham wrote them as 7 tests. Their arithmetic has aged. Their spirit has not, and compressed to its bones it is this. The company should be big, financially strong, owing comfortably less than the ready assets it holds. With 10 straight years of profits, 20 of unbroken dividends, some growth along the way, and a price no more than about 15 times what it earns in an average year. Big, strong, boring, and cheap enough. Every test is the grocer's question in work clothes. How much for what you are actually getting? And Graham says plainly that the tests will eliminate the great majority of stocks on the market. That is not a flaw in the list. Most of what is for sale, at most moments, fails the scale. Today's defensive investor, Jason Zweig writes in his notes to this book, can achieve that whole goal simply by buying one low-cost index fund that holds the entire market. One sentence from half a century on, and the grocer's counter takes us back to 1972. Now meet the alternative. At the exact moment, it looked unbeatable. At the end of 1965, a new mutual fund opened in New York, the Manhattan Fund, run by the hottest young manager in America. Graham tells the whole story without once printing the man's name. The public wired in nearly $250 million, a fortune for a first offering. The fund bought what was flying, stocks at towering multiples of their earnings, paying out little or nothing, moving like rockets. In 1967, it returned 38.6%, far ahead of the market. The queue got longer. The suits got sharper. Then the portfolio met the weather. By the end of the decade, its holdings read like a museum of the era's enthusiasms, and 2 of its largest positions were in companies that went bankrupt within 6 months of each other. A third was fighting off creditors. And Graham adds the detail that stings. Shares of one of those doomed companies had also been bought by university endowments and the trust departments of great banks, the professionals, the committees, the men paid to know better. As for the young manager, he sold his management company, a firm holding less than $1 million of assets, to a large corporation for over $20 million. Graham files the arithmetic with a collector's care. One of the greatest disparities of all times between the results for the manager and the managees. His verdict on the whole species is an old French proverb, plus a change, plus say la même chose. The more it changes, the more it is the same thing. Bright, energetic people, usually quite young, have promised to perform miracles with other people's money since time immemorial. They usually manage it for a while, he says, and they have inevitably brought losses to their public in the end. Stand on the dark street and consider what all of it, the cage and the calendar and the grocer's list, is defending against. Not the market. The market only names prices, and a price can be ignored. Not the salesman. No one is forced to buy a miracle. Graham named the true danger before he built any of the machinery. The investor's chief problem, and even his worst enemy, is likely to be himself. And then, for once, the courtly old man reaches past Wall Street entirely, borrows the best pen in the language, and rewrites Shakespeare. The fault, dear investor, is not in our stars, and not in our stocks, but in ourselves. The widow does not need protection from the market. She needs protection from the evening she decides the money must be made to work harder. The doctor needs protection from his own certainty. The young man needs protection from his own delight. The machine is dull because the enemy is interesting. That is the defensive investor, someone who does almost nothing, on purpose, by rules, and collects what Graham insists is not a booby prize, but the sane share of American business, bought with hardly any of his time. Graham's verdict on that bargain is a sentence that sounds like a shrug until a widow, a doctor, and a young man have made it through one night on this street. To achieve satisfactory investment results is easier than most people realize. To achieve superior results is harder than it looks, but there has been a fourth door on this street all along. For the reader who hears almost nothing as a life sentence, the one ready to make investing a second job, with real hours and a businessman's temper. Graham has rules for that reader too, and they begin, strangely, with a list of what never to buy at any price. Behind that door waits a government bond that spent 50 years riding from riches to ruin and back twice, and a hunting ground where dollar bills sold for 40 cents.